Hi. Good evening, everyone. Hello. On behalf of Art at America Society, we would like to welcome you tonight to El Dorado Roundtable Territory and Extraction Public Program. We present first an introductory remark by Edward Sullivan, co-curator of El Dorado Myth of Gold, a two-part group exhibition exploring the legend of El Dorado as a foundational myth of the Americas. Following the remarks, Sullivan will join Scherezade Garcia, Pablo Helguera, and Julia Santos Solomon and moderate a roundtable discussion with them about the relevance of their work in the context of the exhibition. The El Dorado Myth of Gold exhibition would not be possible without the generous support of the National Endowment for the Arts by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. Additional support was provided by Furthermore, a program of the J.M. Kaplan Fund. We would like to thank these sponsors, as well as Edward J. Sullivan, Scherezade Garcia, Pablo Helguera, and Julia Santos Solomon, and everyone for joining us tonight. Now I'm going to introduce the speakers, Edward, Scherezade, Pablo, and Julia. And I want to remind you that if you have any questions, please feel free to ask at the end. We will have a Q&A. Edward J. Sullivan is a Helen Gold Shepard Professor of History at the Art Institute of Fine Arts and College of Arts and Sciences, New York University, a prominent scholar and curator in the field of modern and contemporary Latin American and Caribbean art. Sullivan is the author of numerous books and exhibition catalogs in this area. He's also the co-curator of El Dorado Myth of Gold. Scherezade Garcia is a painter, printmaker, and installation artist whose work often explores allegories of history, migration, collective and ancestral memory, and cultural colonization and politics. A co-founder of the Dominican York Proyecto Gráfica, she holds an AAS from Altos de Chabón Scholar of Design, a BFA from Parsons School of Design, the New York University, and an MFA from the City College of New York, CUNY. Garcia is an assistant professor of the University of Texas at Austin. She currently lives in Brooklyn and in Austin, Texas. Pablo Helguera is a New York-based artist working with installation, sculpture, photography, drawing, social engaged art, and performance. Helguera's work focuses on a variety of topics ranging from history, pedagogy, sociolinguistics, ethnography, memory, and the absurd in formats that are widely varied, including the lecture, museum display strategies, musical performances, and written fiction. His works as an educator has usually intersected his interest as an artist. Helguera has worked since 1991 in a variety of contemporary art museums and biennials, organizing academic and pedagogical programs. He's currently assistant professor of arts and entrepreneurship at the College of Performing Arts at the New York School of New York. Julia Santos Solomon is a contemporary Dominican artist whose works include paintings, sculptures, and digital media. She has been engaged in the arts for over 40 years. Her vision shapes generations of successful Latinx artists as a founding member of the Altos de Chabón School of Design. She taught fashion, illustration, and design at Parsons School of Design in New York. Santos Solomon's work has been exhibited and collected nationally and abroad. She's a trustee at the Hudson River Museum and on the board of directors of the Woodstock Berkeley Guild. There is going to be also a reception after, so please make sure to join us next door. And also the galleries are going to be open, so you can see again El Dorado Myth of Gold. Thank you very much. And please, the exhibition is closing, just a reminder, on December 16th. Thank you, enjoy.
Thank you. So the first thing I have to do is to figure out how to turn this on. Comienza con cuál artista. Scherezade y luego Pablo y luego Julia. Sí, okay. Okay, perfecto, gracias. Okay, now everything is on. So I would like to welcome you very heartily to the America Society, and I feel myself, I thank you so much, Carla, for your nice introduction, and I am a professor at NYU, and my whole career has taken place there. I'm also a curator. I have two personalities, sort of like schizophrenic art historian, curator, but of course they're all one thing, as I'll talk about in a second. But my entire career has been investigating, teaching, writing about, curating exhibitions about art of Latin America and the Caribbean. I prefer to call it the Americas, as in America Society, because I am very interested in and completely convinced of the absolute necessity of looking at things, art and cultures and societies, in a comparative way. And thus, I don't like to call myself a Latin Americanist, because I think that really creates a sort of niche that is not necessarily productive. So we are all looking at arts of the Americas, and I just say that little preamble because it has to do very much with our exhibition. So the El Dorado Myths of Gold, I should explain a little bit about its genesis, and then I will talk myself a little bit about my colleagues who are happily here, or happily for me, I hope for them too, here at my side. So I have had the privilege of being one of the three curators of the show, and the other two are Aimee Iglesias Lucan, who is the director of the art program here and chief curator, and Tie Jojima, who is curator here at the America Society. And we have created, I think, a bond of not only friendship, but of drive to make a very difficult subject into something that we hope is explicable through the works on display. So the exhibition, I always like to say, it's not a history of gold. It is not a history of art. It is really a series of conversations. It takes up the subject of gold as a substance, of gold as a metaphor for desire, gold as a metaphor for lust, and for expansion and imperialism and colonialism, gold as a metaphor for the substance that was at the base, literally and figuratively, of the beginnings of enslavement in the very, very early years of the contact. There have been various euphemisms for the meeting, the very often unhappy meeting of various worlds in the 15th and 16th centuries, but very often we do not remember what were some of the elements that formed this desire for expansion on the part of the Europeans, or formed the desire for this lustrous substance that is gold, that in societies throughout the world, not just in the societies of pre-Hispanic or indigenous America or in Europe, but in China, in Japan, in Africa. We could go back and back and back in time to look at societies where the extraction of gold and the exchange of gold for other substances and the presence of gold that drew other people to come and mine for it. And gold has been a point of attraction and obsession. I think that's a very good word to use for civilizations, for peoples throughout history. So we have taken up the subject through the lens of the legend, of a story that may or may not have ever have occurred. In the indigenous group called the Muisca people in northern Colombia, there began a story about a prince or a king. And when I say a story, these were things that were handed down, of course, by generation to generation to generation in oral form. They were first written down after the arrival and the conquering of these indigenous groups by the Spaniards. And that was when the first description of, or so-called description of El Dorado, the prince or king who would every year cover himself with gold leaf and dive into Lake Guatavita. Lake Guatavita is a lake not too far from Bogota, and this legend of the shimmering gold man and the lake, which was, according to some parts of the legend, filled with jewels and gold and other precious substances, was really something that attracted the attention and the desire of groups coming from different parts of the Americas in pre-contact times to those, of course, the Spaniards and ultimately the British and the French, and later in what is now Portugal, what is now Brazil, the Portuguese. So the idea of gold and the presence of gold that was found beginning very, very early on in the Caribbean, on the island of Hispaniola, today Dominican Republic and Haiti, and then gold discovered, as it were, in quotation marks, by the invaders in various parts of the Americas, soon became the engine that drove this desire for gain, physical gain of what gold offered as a trading material, and then sort of in a way unleashed all of the horrors that the story of colonialism produced. So that is what we were interested in investigating. And just a few words about how this happened, because I was giving a tour yesterday afternoon to a course at NYU, students who were studying what was called global environmentalism. And since the exhibition has so much to do with the planet and the environment and gold and extractivism, and not only gold, but in more recent times, other such substances as silver, as oil, as water, as we see. If you looked at yesterday's New York Times, there was a shocking photograph taken from the air of the Amazon, dry as a bone. And there are so many instances in which our exhibition refers to and dialogues with the present terrors and horrors of the ecological situation in our planet. So, how did we go about doing that? We wanted to use the El Dorado legend as a hook, as it were, or as a connecting thread. And conversations began with the Americas Society, the two curators that I just named, with myself, who I was very privileged to be invited. I've actually worked on, I think, 6 other exhibitions at the Americas Society since 1988 or something like that. So it's very much like home for me. But we conceived of the idea of partnering and having parallel exhibitions with the Fundación Proa in Buenos Aires and the Museo Amparo in Puebla, Mexico. So there was an exhibition called El Dorado, the Territory, in Fundación Proa in the summer. In our summer, their winter. There will be, in August of this coming year, another parallel exhibition, which will also take the name of El Dorado in Puebla, and of course our exhibition, which examines the myths. And the myths are presented, and we spent a great deal of time debating, talking, arguing about the particularities of how we were going to organize it. We had a series of meetings online for 6 months with scholars from fields as diverse as anthropology and social history and art history and ecology and so on and so forth, talking about their interests in gold and in gold as a substance and gold as a metaphor, etc. So it was a very long and I think very productive series of meetings, conversations, debates that produced a group of artists and a group of works of art from pre-Hispanic times, from the colonial period or the pre-modern period, from modern art, from 19th century art, from the contemporary times. So this was very, very much of a group effort of the Americas Society and many many outside scholars that we have invited to either write for our catalog or do the wall labels or give us advice. And as we have two very eminent artists from the Dominican Republic, a place that is very close to my heart because one of the exhibitions that I worked on here in 1996 was called Modern Contemporary Art of the Dominican Republic. And I wanted to mention that one of the great scholars in the U.S. of Dominican art, who was Abigail Lapin Dardashti, who actually studied with me at the Institute of Fine Arts and then did her PhD at the Graduate Center of CUNY. She was very instrumental in guiding us to a place of even greater knowledge about Dominican art, and her very recent essay, which you can find online, about the Dominican Baroque, I think will illuminate a lot of what we have done. So let me just say one more word about my colleagues, and then we will have each of them present thoughts on their work and with images, and then we have time, we'll have questions from the audience. So I think that one of the beauties about doing programs like this, at least for me, is that I get to talk to my friends, people I admire, artists who are wonderful, and this is certainly one of those cases. So I have here two very dear and old friends and one very dear new friend. Julia, at my right, is, as Carla said, is a very eminent artist and who started her career, I don't know if exactly started it, but at this extraordinary school called Altos de Chabón in the Dominican Republic, a place I've visited on numerous occasions, and it has been something of a nucleus of talent, out of which has emerged several generations of Dominican artists, both those who stayed on the island and those who entered into the Dominican diaspora in the U.S. and in Europe and elsewhere. It is an extraordinary place that teaches art and design and textile, costume, and Julia has been very much involved in that, and I think you still are. Pablo Helguera, actually, Pablo Helguera is not Dominican, he's Mexican, but I'll talk about my other great Dominican friend here, Scherezade Garcia, who is an artist about whose work you can see Julia's work downstairs and Scherezade's work downstairs, but run to the Praxis Gallery on West 20th Street to see a beautiful exhibition of Scherezade's newer work. It is very thought-provoking and very sensuously alive exhibition. So that is my recommendation for the evening. Pablo Helguera is also a very old friend. We met in 1999, when Pablo was working at the education department of the Guggenheim, and he has been an academic and an artist during his entire career. I was at that moment working on an exhibition of Brazilian art at the Guggenheim, and I think we fell in love, brotherly love. He was so great to work with, and he is as important, I would say. I don't know if you agree with me, Pablo, but your efforts in teaching and using your art as a teaching tool have been, as an academic, I admire that so much. And then you went to the Museum of Modern Art, and now you're at the New School. And you are the most brainy and funny artist I know, because you not only do you do these very provocative works based on social realities, but you send out to your friends and various people on your listserv these extraordinary, biting, sarcastic, hysterical cartoons, about which you had a recent exhibition in Buenos Aires, in the same museum as the Gold Show, and your wit is only surpassed by your brilliance as an artist. So, with that, I will turn over the microphone and the images to Julia. I think you were first. Is Julia, Carla, help me. Is Julia's first? Because Scherezade, okay, Scherezade, and then Pablo, and then Julia, and they. And the order is dictated by the PowerPoint. So it's not dictated by alphabetizing or my love for any of them or anything, but just by the PowerPoint. So, okay. As you can see, this is all very informal. We're not, an academic panel is something that I like rush away screaming from. So I try not to have those things in my presence. Scherezade, please you have the floor.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
Do you want to do the clicking?
Well, okay.
Or you tell me when to.
No, yeah,
I'll do it.
do it, yeah. Okay. Well, this is the piece that is downstairs. And this piece is basically a detail of a bigger piece. But this also shows then the way that I work. Everything, has to be adaptable. Every sculpture that I do, using the reason, the colors has this kind of color has a reason. And in this case, for example, it shows like everything that I do with the sculpture has to be soft. It has to be something that can be deflated, can be folded, can be pinched. But also is because it has to be able to travel. It's the idea that it has to survive, it has to float. But also, I always play with this idea of like, there is always something beautiful, like something like all over the top that is gonna seduce you and you're gonna forget the tragedy. But then if you really pay attention, you take a look at the safety ties that are connecting and attaching the pieces, and there are three. So alludes to the ships that came from Europe, and I kind of like to present them like refugees, because they were really desperate looking for something. And then he also talks about the situation that is contemporary, that it hasn't finished, this whole movement of going back and forth. This movement that defines us is something that is still today a taboo. And these safety ties that I connect my inner tubes with is also the material that the immigration police uses to capture illegal aliens. So it has all this narrative. And the idea that it has all these layers, including what I call the tattoo of the ocean, is because all how I understand Las Americas is all about accumulation, collection, movement, constant movement. It's a land that is really a sea. It's rooted in something that is fluid. So then everything has to have that idea of that it floats, and it's not really rooted. Alludes to it, but it's not.
Hello, thank you for coming. Thank you for those beautiful introductions. I would like to speak to you about this piece. Is called Cresta. And I work with contemporary gold leaf. The reason I use gold leaf, because I have an understanding that as an artist, I'm empowered to create healing, historical healing. And every time I work on a piece and I lay down a piece of gold leaf, I am putting back the gold that was extracted. That is my intention with my gold leaf pieces. And I'm very aware that it's an important part of historical healing for myself, for all of Hispaniola, and every nation that has had the same situation. So I take my role as an artist as one that has the potential to create healing. This piece is a landscape. I'm looking at land from the sky, and the accumulation of the shore. It really represents the genocide of the Taínos. What I envisioned in a moment when all of this entire population was eliminated. We're on an island, everything goes out, and all the blood accumulates on the shores. And I know it's kind of heavy, but I had to address this for myself. What does this look like? Now, people who don't know this about that piece don't bring that to it, and I'm very happy to allow them to see something else. But in this exhibition, where we are dealing with El Dorado, a myth of gold, the actual meaning is very important, that it is about the Taino genocide. Okay.
Okay, now we come to Pablo, and then I'll open up a dialogue amongst us, and then we'll turn to the audience.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here and in conversation with all the new friends as well. I wanted to mention that the type of work that I do tends to be outside the box and also site-specific, but in conceptual terms means more like outside of the white cube and social specific. It is also many times autobiographical. As Edward well mentioned, I worked many years at the Guggenheim Museum, and I am very aware of the history of how that museum came to be, as well as many of the great museums in New York that came as a result of the generation of the Gilded Age that created the Frick, the Guggenheim, and the MoMA, and many others. Because this exhibition is about, as Edward mentioned, partially extractivism, and the idea that we get something from the earth as a result of colonialism or extraction of some kind, I've been very aware of where the money that funded all these important turn-of-the-century museums came from. In the case of the Guggenheim family, the story is very interesting, and it is very connected to the Americas. The Guggenheim brothers, who were Solomon R. Guggenheim and his brother Daniel Guggenheim, they purchased the rights to excavate the largest open copper mine in the world in a place called Chuquicamata in Chile. This is the beginning of the 20th century, 1915. They extracted a ton of copper. It was the largest copper mine in the world, and with enormous environmental consequences, which at the time were poorly regulated. Still, they're, I think, very, very poorly regulated in general. But in fact, that's where that Guggenheim money fortune comes from. And I worked on this piece 10 years ago for a performance that I did at the Guggenheim that was titled On the Future of Art, where I told the story. But the Chuquicamata chapter remained as something that was of great interest to me, that was specifically kind of re-extracted from that original work to be presented here in this exhibition. So what you see in the show is a video that's about 8 minutes that tells the story of the Guggenheim family and gives you kind of a panorama or kind of a literary entrance to what it must have been like to be in that mine in the Atacama Desert in Chile in 1915. So it's in the end it's a reflection on how of where wealth really comes from. It's a reflection on colonialism, but also in a more contemporary version, in the contemporary art world, and how we are connected to it in a very direct and explicit way.
Thank you. These very focused views on the three works of art that you present collectively in the exhibition, I think, are wonderful points of departure for maybe a little bit more conversation. And one thing that I would like to ask both Julia and Scherezade, both of you referenced and use gold and water, and in your case, blood. But the idea of this juxtaposition of gold and water in your exhibition and all the work that I've seen of yours from many years ago, the idea of migration and water, and gold as an ideal to achieve, but you can't really achieve it. And in your case, Julia, gold as something that is a reflection of the depredations, of the nightmares that were experienced through the clash of cultures. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about how you formulate in your art these ideas of juxtaposing elements, the element of water, the element of gold, and how it plays in your imagination.
I am someone who was born on an island, so the richness of the vocabulary that water offers me is quite profound. I am very drawn to people of other islands, and I am very drawn to water, and I see it as when I go into the water in the Dominican Republic or anywhere. I was in Sardinia this summer and I went into the water. There's this moment where I feel an inner connection to where I come from. And it just goes, it's a very personal tie-in to my place in the world. So water for me is that source that connects me, and it's what brings everything together. And visually, it is one of the most prominent elements in all my work. Even when I was not doing gold leaf, there was always waves, there were fish, all these imageries that tie me back to where I was born. And it's very comfortable, but also very, very much at my core. It's at my core, the water.
I'm very attracted to your description of entering into the water in the Mediterranean Sea and realizing that the undulating underwater currents are those that come from all other parts of the world. So the Caribbean, the Atlantic, the Mediterranean are, in a sense, could all be configured as part of a psychological waterscape that is of the same place. So I'm fascinated by that description.
And, I wait for it. I'll go in the water,
Uh-huh.
and I wait. When I was in Sardinia, there were this tall algae, and I was floating, waiting, and then I felt it.
Waiting for the connection to
Yeah,
come.
it would just come through and into my body.
Oh.
I said, okay, I'm there.
Wow. I love that idea. And Scherezade, for example, the exhibition now at the Praxis Gallery and the work you've done in the past almost always deals with water, perhaps in a somewhat different way, because especially the work that you have downstairs, which is part, as you said, of a much larger piece, and that much larger piece is on view on West 20th Street. Water has a different connotation. It has something like a negative connotation very often, because you deal with, as you said, hints of, or intimations rather, of immigration, forced immigration and exile, and the dangers of the water. When I was speaking to this group yesterday, I talked about your work, and I remembered in 1993, I think it was, when I made my first trip to Havana, that was the time when Fidel had said to all Cubans, if you want to leave, you can leave. But you make your own way to wherever you want to go. So every night that I was there on that first eye-opening, extraordinarily spiritually troubling, but in a positive way, trip, I would go to the Malecón at the end of the end of the Paseo del Prado, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people going off on rafts and with inner tubes and little sailboats that you might put in a kiddie pool, and you knew that maybe some of them might arrive in Key West, but many of them would be dead. So, am I correct in seeing those representations as well in your art?
Yeah, definitely there's certain things and other things that there is a duality. In everything that I do play with that. Well, I talk a lot about seduction. I like to seduce the audience. And I'm gonna tell you that this is something that has to do, since my work is embedded in history. Mm-hmm. So since I was very a leader, what I like to do, that was an exercise that I used to do, is like, okay, this is what it says in the book. What if I change the events and the characters? So I love to kind of like invent these narrations. And they in that way, they come the utopias, the stories that I like to do. Because what I see the water as an obstacle and a via. Yes, there is a tragedy, but then there is also a hope, beauty. There is also something very epic that also comes a little bit with the whole Christianity thing. That is like, the only way to get to something is because you suffer a lot. But in the case of the water with me, I baptize, very Catholic of me, baptize the Atlantic with another name. It's the liquid highway.
The liquid highway, yes.
Because we are about these movements.
Mm-hmm.
And this, for example, the Mediterranean, the moment we think about the Roman Empire, the only thing I think about is like, we're already there, we're still there, we are still in Christendom, but then I think about, hey, the Mediterranean of Las Americas is the Caribbean, and then what I love about this whole thing of like everything is moving and all these connections with the water is that all this history that live there, all these stories that move and are left and come back with the back and forth of the wave. And also the gold. The gold to me is beyond these, stories of Anacaona, Caunabo, Atuey, and all these caciques from La Española. Also reminds me, and I connected right away with the expedition of La Vaca. So right away, what I feel is that this water, instead of making me like I am in an island surrounded by water and I am trapped, what I see is that these waters, because it's the liquid highway, allows me to be connected with everyone. Mm-hmm. So, as a license that I have as an artist, sometimes my liquid highway seems to be extremely tragic. Like in the one that you're gonna see some of them that are gray, very gray, they are three-dimensional too, and then others that are extremely happy. Because I also like to embrace that transformation that happened with all the tragedy of the crossing of the Atlantic, or the terrible outcomes, but yet there is a light to it. All the transformation, everything becomes transformed, and then there I embrace it. Mm-hmm. So then that splendor of that world has two faces. It's the tragedy, it's poignant, it's stealing, it's genocide, but also it's like, the more is more, and we can be okay with that too.
Actually, that reminds me of a very, very interesting comment that one of the members of a tour that I was giving of the exhibition recently, very young student, said to me, "How is it that such an exhibition that is so beautiful can be so painful at the same time?" And, for some 18-year-old person who maybe is spending much of their time with, Instagram or something, to have that perception, I think was very gratifying and very interesting. So, one other remark I wanted to make about your work is that I'm very interested in how you integrate, you mentioned religion, Catholic religion, but so much of your painting particularly is about integration of remembrances of Catholicism, of West African religions, and the mixture, the métissage, or mestizaje of those. I think that's something else that I am very, very interested in your work.
Thank you. I call it the politics of inclusion. And I am very much inspired. Thank you for mentioning it. I am very much inspired by I love the concept of the convivencia before the take of Granada, before the fall of the Alhambra. Mm-hmm. I love that. And it's funny. I always think that memories come afloat. And every time that I start painting, and I like I said, I am very much into history. I read everything that you have to read, but when I am painting or doing anything, I do it with my guts. So then there is when things come afloat. And the majority of my work really is about the Afro-Caribbean Al-Andalus.
Oh, so interesting. The Afro-Caribbean Al-Andalus, or in other words, the Afro-Caribbean experience is parallel to that of Spain, which was a colonized country, and a mixture of Christian, Jewish, Islamic cultures and religions, and that's a very interesting point. I want to turn to Pablo and use, in my question, a term that I just mentioned, and that is pain. So in this video, which I find so thought-provoking, you, in a sense, rip off the bandage, or you clarify for people who do not know the history, as I really didn't, of the wealth of the Guggenheim family, which to a great extent accounts for the existence of the Guggenheim Museum and the Guggenheim foundations, and many other permutations of the wealth of the Guggenheim family. You are working under the rubric of what would be called in contemporary art institutional critique. And so I am curious to know how you approach the idea of revealing stories that are about places and people that we know and often revere, but we don't know that much about them. And how I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot. How do you conceive of these extraordinarily interesting projects as pushing forward the ideas and the struggle for social justice in our contentious world?
Thanks, Edward. Well, I think I need to say that, so I worked in museums for 29 years. The Guggenheim for many years, MoMA for many years, and I'm very glad I'm no longer working in those museums, because I now finally can say many things that I was not able to say when I was actually inside those institutions, and I was witness to a lot of things that must be said or revealed. I've always felt that in the same way that we, in a perfunctory way, sometimes we do land acknowledgements, and we say, well, when we try to acknowledge the Lenape and so forth whenever we do events or things like that, we should also be doing wealth acknowledgements, which is things like, where did that money come from that is funding these programs, that is funding these foundations? When you really look at that history, specifically the American wealth of the 19th century is very problematic. And of course, it's a very uncomfortable thing to discuss with foundations, with museums that have been created ostensibly to also do good, and they do a lot of great things and a lot of wonderful things, but many times this history is never acknowledged. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing this project, I was no longer at the Guggenheim, of course I was working as an artist, and I tried to access the records of the Guggenheim Foundation, and I realized that there was nothing, or if there was something, it was not really accessible for researchers or scholars. All the information I was able to find was from external sources or back in Latin America, in Chilean universities or whatever it was. So although this information is there, but it really needs to be mined, in some, pun intended, to actually present information. So I think it's the role of the artist, perhaps in this new time, this is like maybe new type of institutional critique, of really try to find where those wealth sources really came from, and not really to really present it in a way that you can discredit the institution, but simply to understand where this privilege came from and who also was the person who paid for it, because the people who paid for it dearly with their lives. Yeah.
And in that way, I think this piece, your piece that is down in the exhibition, fits in perfectly with the notion of critique and questioning and investigating that this exhibition presents. It's not, I was going to say it's not a beautiful exhibition, but it is a beautiful exhibition. It has very beautiful and stunning things in it. But you have to really look carefully and think for yourselves about what it represents. And the layers and layers and layers will start to peel away. And I think you will find in this part one, as you will find in part two that opens in January 24th, that that it has been very carefully put together to provoke questions and provoke the type of research that you've done in this piece and the type of questions that both Julia and Scherezade are provoking on the part of the viewer. Like, what does it mean to have this gold leaf on this on the support? It's very beautiful, but then you think about the further meanings, or then you think about the further meanings of this juxtaposition of gold and the, you used a term that I didn't know, an emblem of water, or what was that?
The tattoo water,
Yeah, but you used a term I really liked, and I forgot what it was. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, so I'm just trying to say that that it's very complex, and this complexity, I think, is reflected in the work of all three of you that approach it in very different ways, but have the overall concepts as your guiding forces in your work. So I think that we should open up the floor, as it's almost 7, to questions from the audience or comments or anything you would like to present. Okay, thank you for being the first person. It's always hard to start a conversation. Thank you, sir, please. No, you who raised your hand. Yes. I'm trying to give you a compliment and thank you for being the first interlocutor.
No, thank you, everyone. I really felt very interesting when you comment about Christianity and all these issues, because I do believe that people are not touching very much the power that Christianity actually had in this whole movement of colonization or genocide or whatever you want to mention. So my question is for everyone, actually. What's the worst force in this colonization of the Americas? The Portuguese, the Spaniards, or Christianity?
Spaniards, Portuguese, or Christianity.
Yeah.
That's the key word in your question. Does anyone want to take on that difficult issue but important one?
I couldn't point a finger at one of those European countries, but I want you to know that there's a book that I read. It's called The Rivers of Gold, and it very simply stated the volume of gold that was extracted. I think it was like 340 million pounds. And whenever I go to Europe and I go into a major cathedral, I see it. I see it on the walls, I see it in the altars, I see it on the floor. And personally, I was raised Catholic, but I have rejected a lot of it because I know too much. And when I go into these beautiful cathedrals, they feel more like a palace for an emperor and not a spiritual place for me. I could not pray there, but being an artist, I love going there because I see the best in marble, in carving, in sculpture, in paintings. So that's how I approach it.
It's a very interesting answer, that you can approach it as an artist but not as a creyente.
No, mijo.
Very good. Pablo, did you have something to add?
I think you said it. I mean, it's exactly right. And when you go to those churches, what you see like the Cathedral of Seville or all these beautiful golden altars, this is the gold of the Americas, right? That was brought in and presented to the powers that be to create these structures. So Christianity indeed kind of there's an avarice in that in Christianity that brings that gold into Europe, and I think that's what's the most troublesome part of that history. I mean, there's of course the syncretism. There's a way in which like all the indigenous cultures mix with the Spanish and produce their own version of culture. But what I find more troublesome is that the role that the Catholic Church played, in extracting that money. Yeah.
There is an image, and I think it's after this one.
Scherezade, did you want to put the microphone a little bit
I'm
closer?
sorry. Yeah. Oh, there's an image that is like the main piece that is the constant that detail that I have downstairs, and it's serious. I think, yeah, keep going. I think it must be there someplace.
Here?
I thought it was in another one.
There,
No,
there's some-
another one. Yeah, keep going. Keep going. No, keep going.
Well,
Well, we can keep that one.
Yeah.
Okay, but there is a one, then this before this, that is a series, I call it Theories of Freedom. And the whole series was inspired because I was listening to TV. And this is how sometimes happen things happen like so mundane. I am listening to a priest explaining to some school kids like second grade, then how everything was so good and they came with God, and then they made this beautiful cathedral that's in Santo Domingo La Española, beautiful cathedral, and then just next to it was the gold mine, so they were killing 2 birds in one shot. And it was the way that they were telling this story was like so like cute, like a Disney, like we're so good. Everything's gonna be good. And look at that. Look how easy. Now we have people working. We're giving work to the Indians. And that's how it's, and this was 2011. And those comments and that information kind of like inspired an entire group of work. And the piece that is like many, and very tall, like a stack garden inner tubes, it was titled Cathedral, the Cathedral. It was a floating cathedral.
very good answers to that question. We have time for another 1 or 2 questions before we have our reception. Anybody else have a burning desire to ask something of our panelists? Yes, Tia, one of the curators of the exhibition, one of my heroes.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation and for the amazing moderation, Edward. So this show is about myths, right? El Dorado is a myth that really drove colonization of the Americas, so as this driving desire. And I wanted to ask if any of you, or if you three could share any kind of personal myth that drives your practice. And I think that some of you touched upon this a little bit, Julia and Scherezade now, but anything you might want to share about your own personal mythology that drives a practice that is so much grounded on decolonial practices, critiquing exploitations and systems of power, etc.
Well, that's a fascinating question. This is about your dig into your minds, your inner life, about how it affects your work.
I think I'll share one. And I was just talking about it because the last time I was sitting here on this stage, I was speaking about this project that I did 15 years ago that involved a myth, the myth of Pan America. And I was always fascinated by, especially after I emigrated to the United States as a Mexican artist, and realized that I had a lot of bonds with other Latin American artists without having even been to their countries, that we spoke the same language, that we knew the same music, read the same literature, saw the same TV programs and movies, so things like that. We shared a culture, but we did not share a country. And I always was fascinated by the mythical notion of Pan America, and specifically the Pan American Highway. So I did a project called the School of Pan American Unrest, where I drove from Alaska to Chile, all the way to Tierra del Fuego, to search for that mythical place, which is mythical. It's like El Dorado. It's everywhere in everybody's minds, and it was in the writings and the thinking of many important politicians like Bolivar, who wanted to create a like Latin American country, like Gran Colombia. And so it's eventually an impossibility, really, like the whole idea that one day the Americas will be a single country. But I yet believed in the idea of pursuing and thinking about what will be it like for us to see ourselves as Edward said at the beginning of this conversation, as Americans, and using the word America not as representing the United States, but representing all of the Americas. So it's like I love these ideas, those utopian notions, and that even if you know that they're perhaps unattainable or intangible, they really propel your imagination as an artist.
Thank you. Scherezade or Julia?
I'm gonna add something that has to do with you. One thing that I also find fascinating about Las Americas, this idea that we all together, we share so much, but we're so different according to the area. It's like only somebody that is a mestizo can have those utopian dreams. That is Bolivar. Bolivar was the outcome of the encounter. And I find that very important. And another thing is that comes to mind, and what Tia, I think I told to you about that, is like, it's so much beauty that is sad. And that's why I have a whole series that is called something like, it's so sunny that is dark. Because it's so much light that is blinded. And that's one of the reasons I start using God as well. It's the idea of like, it is so much that I cannot see. But there's also this idea of hope, of riches,
Julia, do you have a personal mythology that takes you forward?
I do. I never thought of it in those terms. My mythology is this idea that even though I'm a single human being, that I can have an effect on the past and in the future. My greatest comfort is speaking to young people who are coming up, particularly if they are of a certain age and they're confused. I have nieces and nephews who think that being Dominican means is defined by their neighborhood in New York. The whole idea of the island itself is like a postcard to them. So I empower myself in the studio, and I say, I'm going to do something that will help that generation understand that they're tied to all of this, that they have a relationship that is much deeper than they realize. And I don't know that my nieces and nephews feel it, but I give myself that role. And I understand that I have the desire to create healing, and that I also am what I call a hybrid generation. I was born in the Dominican Republic. I was raised in the United States. So that always puts me in a very awkward situation, like being a 10-year-old and having to translate letters from my family because they didn't read enough English. Or my grandmother fell and cut her head, and I had to call the ambulance as a child. So there are things that I had to navigate, being from both cultures, and it puts me in a very particular place. Today my aunt told me I wasn't Dominican because I don't cook the way she does. And she took away my Dominican card. And I said, Dia, it's okay. We can order pizza. It's okay. It's little stuff like that. But I ride this place on this bridge, and it puts me in a position to translate for both sides. And I think my myth really is taking it on and saying, I'm going to get up in the morning, go to my studio, and understand that that's where I'm starting from as a hybrid, and then do the best I can.
Those were three super elegant and beautiful explications of a very thought-provoking question. So that is, I think, a perfect way to wrap up this panel that has been all about thought-provoking ruminations on your work and how the three bodies of work fit together and how we can understand them within the context of this complex exhibition. And I think the last thing I will say is that the work of all of you has added enormously to what I hope is the success of the show, but the depth of it. And we've talked about this idea of depth that is both psychological and physical, depth of the ocean. And I cannot thank you enough for your participation, and thank you for yours, dear audience. And with that, we will have our reception next door.